This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 4 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Wells House Phenomenon. Okay, hi there, listener, watcher. Sorry, I'm looking to the side. We're in yet another new situation here. It's your friendly neighborhood podcaster, pill taker, coffee drinker, Jonathan here. Bad bangs cutter, Jonathan here. Perpetually looking as if I'm going bald, even though I'm not. And here to present you with a new episode of the Floor Rejects podcast. If you are watching this, and I don't think anyone ever has, but if you are, you will catch me looking over here. That is because I have changed my whole setup to try and eliminate some of the noise from my neighbors. If you recall in the past, in the background of most of my audio, since I've kind of had to adapt to more working from home and needing more space, there's the constant sound of laundry, like a kind of a distant banging in the background. And that's because my laundry is below my the last place I was recording. And so I moved after like 3 months of constant laundry, like loud. It's loud during the day. It's loud at night. And so I moved into my bedroom. As you can see, hi, welcome to my bedroom. Don't mind the basket of dirty laundry or my shoes. There's a cat sleeping here. There's another cat sleeping. Oh, he just woke up over there. And as soon as I moved in here, I guess is when they decided to play video games with their speakers pointed into the floor. So I'm doing great. I'm looking at myself. I can't help it. It's not because I think I'm beautiful. It's in fact the opposite. But we're not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about chapter 15 of the floor, having a stroke, of the Wells House Phenomenon. If you don't remember what happened in chapter 14, or you're just tuning in for the first time, hi, bud. A little basic context. Warren finally found Thomas within his dream cycle and confronted him on what was going on, trying to get some answers, trying to figure out kind of what the sitch was. And he got his answers. He found out that all three of the people there are incubuses and succubuses. We discussed what the differences are between them, how they can kind of shift into each other or some variant, how in lore what they are versus what they represent, kind of how they functioned in every single culture because they are referenced in a lot of cultures, and how in modern day we kind of just assume that they are more like a sleep paralysis manifestation, which is super common with sleep paralysis, is the manifestation of a figure kind of standing in the distance when you open your eyes and can't move. That's really the long and short of what we discovered. So before I lose my mind, and so that I can check and make sure that we've got video, audio, and that you can't hear everything going on up there, we're going to just jump into it. We're going to jump right into it. Call me Phil DeFranco. I've made that joke before. I'm so sorry. But we're going to get into chapter 15 here. So stay tuned. No ads. We're not doing ads. So, ew. Okay, bye. Chapter 15, The Liaison. The next few days, Warren spent helping Edward clean up the property. He helped him put the front door back up into its frame, helped him remove the truck from the side of the house, and get the barn sealed back up. The trailer was left for the time being, Warren satisfied it was safe in the barn, oblivious to the interior. As far as Thomas, during his waking hours, Warren was under the impression from Edward that his brother had been found nearby and taken to the hospital. Warren wanted to visit, but Edward insisted they stay and work on the house, and that was what Thomas had asked for. Warren found that the truck was still serviceable, worse for wear, but it still served useful in hauling the carcass of his Jeep out to the main road. When he let Lila know that an insurance adjuster was coming by to inspect the vehicle and have it towed away, she was markedly insistent that it be done outside the gates, reminding Warren of the strange set of rules he had signed up for. Eventually, they dragged it beyond the fence, a trail of crumbling black plastic and broken glass running down the drive and into the street. Warren met the man down at the gate when he arrived 5 days after the storm.
"Hi there,"
he called, jumping from the battered truck and greeting the man. He was about Warren's age with curly hair sticking out of a branded baseball cap. He smiles and waves, introducing himself as Garrett and asking Warren about the Jeep, what had happened, things that felt fairly standard. Warren explains the best he can while admitting that there were some gaps in his memory from the storm. The adjuster seems understanding, scribbling notes as he circles the shell of the vehicle, scrunching his face up as he catches a whiff of the burnt plastic. Warren finds him charming, and with his wide, square torso and strong, rounded thighs and haunches, he piques Warren's curiosity. He can feel a hint of intrusion into his thought process, like a memory fighting to the surface as he stood in the road, looking at the massive entrance. Garrett pulls out his phone, swiping through the screen.
"Oh, your phone won't work out here. Some sort of interference. Mine barely works unless I'm in the house,"
Warren explains, and Garrett smiles, explaining that he was only taking photos, and after a minute confirms that his phone was working fine, the sound of an email sending bringing an unnatural tinny sound to the otherwise quiet road. Warren finds this odd.
"So, is there a house back there, or just a farm or something?"
Garrett asks, gesturing towards the hill. Warren nods, explaining the short version of how he ended up in rural West Virginia. Garrett appears unimpressed, but listens all the same as he continues taking notes. Warren looks back at the gate and has to do a double take. The fancy wrought iron detailing on it looked different, wrong. He moved closer to examine it, and the closer he got, the more it appeared that the iron was rusting, its black paint puffing up and sliding off of a red and orange skeleton, moving and shifting almost in real time. He had never noticed it before. It had always seemed immaculate, just like the rest of the property. He turns to Garrett, who was leaning against his own vehicle, writing something on his clipboard.
"Got what you need?"
Warren asks, taking the moment before the man looks up at him to savor the fantasy that his legs, straining against his khakis, provide Warren's generally dormant imagination. Garrett looks up, smiling pleasantly. His left front tooth had a small chip, and his round, bearded face reminded Warren that there was a world outside of the Wells house, filled with people who aren't the three people he spoke to every day.
"Yeah, I think so. I'll have it picked up as soon as I have my report up to your agent. If you don't mind me asking, can I see the spot that it caught fire? I just need to document it,"
Garrett asks, and Warren knows that this is completely reasonable. He looks up to the hill and sees no one, and he nods, punching in the gate code and telling Garrett to hop into the truck. The man obliges, and Warren smells his cologne, musky and mixed with the smell of cigarettes, and he smiles out the window as he drives up to the large burn spot on the hill. As he parks, he can see the house in the distance and hopes that no one is looking out the windows. He was sure Lila was in the kitchen on the other side of the house, and Edward was back at the barn. So he shows Garrett the spot, and the man, sensing the urgency from Warren, who is constantly glancing up at the manor, makes quick work of the photos before hopping back into the truck. He looks up at the manor as they swing around, and Warren catches a glimpse of confusion on his face.
"So that's your house?"
he asks, and Warren nods, a bit of pride swelling up in his chest that he knew he didn't really deserve, but he liked the reaffirmation of status.
"Interesting,"
the man says, and Warren passes back through the gate, dropping the man off at his car.
"Have a good day, Mr. Wells,"
Garrett says, but his tone is less amiable, much more formal after being on the property.
"Thanks. Will you be sending anything to me?"
Warren asks as the man begins to climb down into his sedan.
Yes. Your agent will get in touch with you as soon as he has my report,"
Garrett says, shutting his door and zooming off before Warren can ask him anything else. He shrugs it off, driving back up to the house where he hunkers down in the fourth-floor studio, smoking out the window and lazily reading Gilgamesh as the day drags on. Normally he would have read in the library, but the room was uncharacteristically cold when he entered it, the lights flickering strongly as he ran his fingers down the spines on the shelves, so he opted for the bright room at the peak of the building. He enjoyed the room, treating it as his only space that was his in the house, because he felt like even his bedroom was fairgrounds. The only two rooms he hadn't noticed had been touched were the studio and his bathroom, which Lila said was too private for her to intrude on, so he cleaned it himself, leaving his laundry in a basket in the bedroom. When he heard Lila mounting the stairs, he tossed a butt out the window and cranked it closed, rushing out to meet her so she didn't have to climb higher than needed. She smiled as he rounded a corner on the second floor and almost knocked her over.
"Dinner is ready, Warren,"
she says, and the meal, along with the conversation, was serviceable. He found that now that it was just the three of them, Edward was much more coy and less flirty at dinner. Warren assumed it was because he didn't want to make his mother uncomfortable now that Thomas couldn't distract her, and the owner of the house didn't read into it more. His relationship with Edward was progressing slower than his past ones, having just allowed Edward into his room the night before when he was getting ready for bed, just for a few moments to talk and tease each other. Edward left before anything got too serious, only giving Warren a sad puppy dog look as he left. On this night, after the strange little interaction with the adjuster, he was a bit unnerved. He couldn't stop seeing the gate in his mind's eye, its paints rotting and sloughing off. He was going to get back to the gate in the morning and investigate, maybe head into town to get some breathing room. He sat in the sitting room in the front of the fire as the heating was still on the fritz after the storm, and ruminates on the strange occurrence with a hot toddy in his hand when Edward walked in, sitting cross-legged next to him, his own drink steaming.
Hey, War, you okay? You seem kind of bothered.
The man asks, his dark amber eyes soft and kind. Warren smiles up at him as he sips the burning liquid.
Yeah, it's nothing.
Warren says, thinking he would sound insane.
No, tell me.
Edward says, his body shifting down towards Warren, who decided he could be honest.
When I met the adjuster down in front for the Jeep, I thought I saw something weird. The gate, it's always looked perfect from what I remembered, but it was like the gate was rusting right in front of me. It was so weird.
Warren explains, and Edward, quickly concealing concern, wraps an arm around Warren's shoulders.
Strange. Maybe it was from the storm and the humidity. Maybe Thomas just hasn't been maintaining it. I'll take a look at it.
Edward says, kissing Warren's forehead.
It doesn't sound crazy to you? It was so strange, I don't know.
Warren is now more worried that he sounds crazy than before he had said it out loud.
No, the gate is iron, and iron rusts so fast. Have you ever gotten water on a cast iron pot? It's quick.
Edward says, and Warren relaxes back into him, content to enjoy the fire and cuddle. Edward wraps around Warren, his hands massaging the smaller man's neck, which was filled with unexplainable knots. He lets his head fall back against Edward's quietly humming chest, allowing his body to rest, small moans escaping him as his knots are thoroughly broken up. He doesn't see it coming when Edward folds down over him, kissing him softly with lips warmed by the fire. He doesn't bother to open his eyes, the whiskey running through his body keeping him still while Edward opens him up, his hands stilling around Warren's neck, holding him still as they're drawing closer to each other. Eventually, without a word, Edward's hands slide under Warren and lift him, his eyes open as he sees the hall's heavy brocade wallpaper for a moment before it gets too dark to see, only feel as Edward circled around him, pulling him gently through the bedroom door, which is only lit by candles. There was power again, but it was spotty, Edward having previously explained that he can't track down the issue yet, and so Lila had been leaving candles lit at night just in case. Warren told her it wasn't needed, but she was insistent that it was her job to anticipate his needs, and in this moment, Warren finds it perfect when he's laid gently on his bed. He's not drunk, but his head was certainly lighter than it was sober.
I think it's time, don't you?
Edward asks, his voice deep and gravelly as he pulls his shirt over his head. Warren doesn't hesitate, nodding and attempting to pull his shirt off while lying back, but when he struggles, Edward laughs and leans down to pull it off gently. His hair-covered chest runs down Warren's bare torso and makes him shiver.
I've been waiting for this. For you.
Edward says, unbuckling his belt one-handed without breaking his eye contact. Warren pauses, his mind clearing up.
Edward, what will this mean?
He asks, unsure how to phrase it. It was complicated. Edward was technically his employee. He would live here presumably until he wasn't needed. Warren didn't want to abuse his power the way he'd seen his parents abuse Roz and the other people who'd worked for the family. Even with his mind muddled by several forces at once, he knew he wanted to be real. Edward's sly grin spreads across his face as he shucks his pants.
It means I am yours.
Edward says, and Warren feels a tingling at the back of his mind, which he mistakes as a sign of desire to have sex again, desire to be wanted, desire to love, which he hadn't experienced as an adult. Warren nods again and reaches up, pulling the large man down onto him, feeling pleasure rush through him as the hair tickles him. Edward is gentle, letting his hands do most of the exploring, kissing Warren deeply as he unzips the man's pants, sliding them down until there's just 2 thin layers of fabric between them. As they get heavier and more involved, Warren feels his urges return, the ones that had been pushing down at the small voice at the back of his head that he'd been told to listen to, but he was just loose enough to embrace it, and he pushes up on Edward, his body language shifting. He moves back onto the pillows, looking at Edward where he stands at the foot of the bed, a confused look on his flushed face.
I want to savor this. I want to look at you.
Warren says. He'd been pressed against Edward so many times, felt his body, felt him, but he hadn't gotten the full view, and he had always been a bit more dominant and savoring when he'd had a lover in a more long-term situation. Warren gestures with a finger for Edward to take his underwear off. Edward smiles and does so, letting them fall to the floor before walking around the side of the bed, presenting himself to Warren in his entirety. Warren is in awe, much the way he was every time he looked at Edward, but it was different. His brawny, tanned form lit from the side by the puny candles. In the flickering light, his chest heaves from desire, his shadow on the wall next to him so intimidating that Warren thinks he might not be able to treat Edward the way he had treated past lovers. But the man stands there, letting Warren gawk at him. His chest gave way into his belly, which puffed with each breath and bulged out like a barrel. The muscles under his skin rolled as he inhaled. His thighs bulged, covered in dense black hair, straining as he shifts from one foot to the other, his strong calves bowing out when he sticks his arms and begins to turn with a sly smile. His cock hangs low and curves slightly, and as Warren watches it lengthens, Edward's breathing quickens, now audible in the quiet room as his blood moves. His manhood was impressive, exorbitant, and still growing as he turned around. Warren is mesmerized, completely enthralled as he traces the deep muscled trenches running down his expansive back, all pointing down to the deep furrow at the top of his ass. But his crowning glory was his rear. The muscles were spectacular, massive dimples framing the bulbous shape. Warren is in awe when Edward turns back around, his erection now at full steam, so heavy and engorged that it pointed down. He walks towards the bed slowly, his pecs bouncing with each step. When he hikes a leg up on the bed, his organs swinging between his legs, Warren reaches out and Edward freezes, being uncharacteristically timid. Warren cups him, and Edward's head falls forward and he moans at the contact. Warren grins and gently pulls at him, and Edward climbs up, sitting onto Warren's lap, his erection slapping almost bumptiously onto Warren's stomach. He laughs at the audacity of it as Edward sinks down lower, grinding his bare ass into Warren's groin. The large man's head tilts back, his hands sliding up onto Warren's slighter chest, digging his fingers in as his hips rock back and forth, his mouth coming down onto Warren's as they writhe together, locked in an intensely sensual embrace. When Edward presses Warren down into the pillows, his mouth sinks lower, kissing at Warren's jaw as Warren's nails slide down his back in ecstasy. Then the large man's mouth is sucking hard at the other man's neck, making his chest arc up into Edward's waiting arms. He holds the man tight to him and runs his hands up Warren's sides, his nose sunken into the brown hair pressed to his face. Warren inhales the musk coming from Edward's thumping chest, his fingers tweaking the pert nipples he finds blindly. Edward lets out a small whine, leaning back and sliding to the side, gripping either side of Warren's underwear.
You sure you want this?
Edward asks huskily, and Warren can barely voice his agreement before the brief split apart, the brute's pure strength rendering his shorts a scrap of fabric tossed aside. Edward laughs as Warren's erection springs forward, slapping back against Edward's thigh. He leans back down, pressing their bodies together, the combination of hot skin and coarse hair sending Warren into overdrive. He thrusts his hips, and Edward laughs into his ear. Edward slides his body down, Warren slowly, and kisses his skin every few inches. Then his face is right above Warren's sex, and with a tawdry look, he sinks his face down onto it, licking at his lover gently, toying with him and making his hands grip at the sheets. Edward wraps his lips around Warren, bobbing slowly, letting Warren savor it, just as he'd asked. The man laid out on the bed is turning and rolling in fits of elation, his mind no longer concerned with strange thoughts, missing time, or any kind of issue. He'd been so pent up since he'd arrived. He was used to sex being at the other end of an app, but he hadn't been intimate with a man in months now, and he could tell by the way he bucks at the twirl of his partner's tongue. Warren hums, pulling up and looking at Edward from his vantage point. Warren looks down, his chest surging as he can feel a tightness building in his stomach, drawing up to his core.
Yeah?
Edward asks, his lips glistening. Warren finds the look on his face irresistible. He flips over onto his side and pats the bed next to him.
Yeah, get up here.
Warren commands, and Edward obliges with a smirk, his heavy body shaking the bed as he flops down. The smell of his alluring sweat causes Warren to waste no time in going down on the swain across from him. The corners of his mouth strain to accommodate Edward, who reciprocates. Warren's eyes water as he sinks further and further down, his air cut off as he measuredly moves up, pausing to push himself slowly, his throat burning as coarse hair tickles at his nose. He can hear Edward gasping in shock, his body going rigid, his legs quivering under Warren's hand, and the small man slowly pulls back. And when Edward's dick slides out of his mouth, he smiles down the length of his body to Edward's frozen, shocked face, the head of Warren's cock still perched in his open mouth.
Sorry, it's been a while,
Warren says, and Edward slowly shakes his head.
No apologies necessary,
Edward says, returning to his fixation, Warren's eyes rolling into the back of his head as he hungrily fillets the hard-bodied companion. Edward grows quick, his tongue twisting and his mouth making guttural, sloppy sounds. Warren knows what's coming. He knows that he too is quickly reaching his climax. He pulls the gargantuan member from between his lips and puts a hand on Edward's flank.
Get up here. I want you to come with me.
Warren grunts, and Edward spins as Warren lays back onto the pillows again. Edward straddles his thighs, just enough clearance for the both of them. Edward frantically tugs at himself, grunting and jerking as Warren mirrors him.
I'm gonna...
Warren begins, but before he can finish his sentence, Edward's body hunches forward, falling hard onto one hand as he ejaculates, shooting white ropes across Warren's chest, up his neck onto his chin. Warren splatters across Edward's chest too, both of them huffing and grinning dumbly. Edward falls against Warren and they laugh, kissing passionately as he traces his fingers over Edward's back. The big man shivers, giggling against Warren's mouth as he reaches down, grabbing the remains of Warren's underwear and leans up, groaning as their skin sticks together. He wipes Warren's face gingerly, his smile only wavering as he wiped his hypersensitive dick, and Warren's face doing the same. Edward falls beside Warren, who rolls onto his side, looking deep into Edward's glinting eyes.
I'm guessing you'll let me stay the night?
Edward asks, and Warren guffaws, slapping the man's chest lightly as he leans over and blows out the candles on the bedside table. He pulls Edward close, pressing his chest to the man's back as he pulls the disheveled sheets up around them. His mind doesn't even stutter, shutting down quickly as Edward's breathing slows, a rhythmic lullaby to send him to his dreams. All right, girlies, I'm back. It's me. I'm back. I want to talk about this chapter. Yes, it's a sex chapter. We get it. We've read them before. It's very much fanfiction vibes. It's very much any sort of eroticism. But I want to touch on a few key things. Number one, I'm going to keep looking at myself. I really am loving this like blue and red light. I guess to you it just looks purple. But to me it looks like red and blue. It's very fun. Not important. Did my cat just die? Jim. Okay, he's still alive. So what I came to a realization, and I may have come to this realization before and just ignored it, but when it comes to writing sexually graphic content, it exists out there. I will say that for like a Harlequin romance novel, your traditional one that you're going to find in like Kroger or Gelson's or what is it, Dwayne Reed, if you're like in New York or whatever, like a supermarket Harlequin romance novel, typically won't be that graphic. You won't see words like dick and cock. Don't love that word myself, but you got to use what you got to use. There's not that many words for it. You hear words like her womanhood, his manhood. I don't love that. I used it, I think, once in the chapter, but we referenced the genitals many more times than that. But I just use it the once. One, I don't love it because it is sort of like gender binary shit, like his manhood, her womanhood, and we know exactly what they reference as if women can't have penises and men can't have vaginas. Like, am I taking it too far? Maybe, but I just don't love it. But then I thought, I don't fucking care. Like, I'm not doing this to be rich. I'm not doing this to be famous. I'm doing it to kind of create my own thing. And I spent like an hour kind of sitting there, slowly smoking cigarettes. Can you picture it? Me outside in the snow, just slowly smoking cigarettes, thinking about why I had this like weird shame about reading something that I had written that I like, that is not for everybody and may not be for most people and may not be that good when it comes to like quality of writing. And I know it's not perfect. It's a rough draft. It's a second draft. You know, I write it and then I quickly review it just to make sure it makes sense and it's getting us where we need to go. It's a rough draft, but like, why am I like, fuck having shame about it? There's no reason to have shame about a perfectly natural thing. There's no reason to feel shame about kind of publicizing things that have been forced to be private for so long, because it is not like there is any shortage of heterosex scenes in movies and shows and books and any sort of media that you can consume. It has existed for forever, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's still kind of this shame attached to it, like shielding your eyes when you're watching it, or being like ee tee when you're watching it. And I think we can kind of just skip by that when it comes to queer stuff, because queer people have been shoved down for so long. We've been told that our identities are bad, and we're still being told them every day. On the day I'm recording, Rush Limbaugh has died, which is great because he was a literal fucking monster. But he's not the only one out there that was a monster. He's not the last one left. You know what I mean? So it's not as if it stopped. Certainly it's gotten better. I don't ever want to like act as though my generation as a whole has gone through nearly what the generation before mine and the generation before that has gone through. No. Still hard. Still get called a fag all the time by straight people. Just this afternoon, I literally had to have like a phone conversation with someone I worked with who had to be berated by a man who just called me slurs and had never met me. He had just heard my voice. So it's not over. And that's why I kind of feel like it's okay to just skip over the shame, right? Because eventually we hope that all expressions of sex, all expressions of sexuality, things that are natural and fine and happy and great and things that people should enjoy, don't have stigma, don't have shame, don't have cringe attached to them. But I'm like doing my best to get rid of that cringe altogether. Not like gently introduce gay erotica into like regular formats, because there's literally already, I'm pretty sure there's a straight podcast that just reads porn. Like he reads porn. I think like his dad writes it or something. This guy's dad writes it, and that's great. I love that. The idea of a queer version of that existing, though, still I think there's like this sort of stigma attached that it's not as comedic, it's not as interesting, it's not as arousing for most people. Even though I feel like not only are like gay people into gay porn, but I feel like this may be incorrect, this may be wrong, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of people who identify as women who are attracted to men who watch gay porn. I heard a theory that the reason that a lot of, for the sake of it, let's just say for the reason that a lot of women or femme-identifying people watch gay porn is because there is no femme-identified person or woman in the video to be made the object of desire. So we've talked about in the past the idea of the male gaze. The male gaze kind of goes out the window because the only people to objectify are the males in the video. I think that's interesting. I also think that this is another good way to kind of create erotica that arouses not only like cis gay men, but can also arouse and intrigue and open the minds of other people who might be attracted to men or like masculine presenting people or people with penises, depending on what your focus is, what you're interested in. This is a different way to do it without having to exploit women or femme identifying people or people with vaginas, or really without, without having that same sort of power structure that I think we're used to with the traditional Harlequin romance novel. I think it's interesting. I think it's a fun thought. But my biggest thought was, why the fuck am I feeling ashamed as if these aren't, number one, activities that I participate in with enthusiastically, really. I mean, not so much now that I'm on antipsychotics, but would participate in enthusiastically. Why is there shame around that? Why is it not shameful that we watch porn? Some people aren't okay with watching porn. I think most people are, though. Why is it okay to watch porn? And there's no shame in it, but it's not okay to listen to it. Would I recommend listening to any sort of erotica just like on the speakers in your car with like a group full of people? Probably not. But I think that's just because you don't want everyone to get horny all at once. You want to spread it out. Also, your friends, depending on what your group of friends is like, might think that's a little odd. They might not. They might be into it. That's fine too. But I just felt this sort of weird shame that I haven't felt in a very long time. Like, at this point, I'm one of those people that talks about sex so much that it like has no meaning. Like, it's not shocking. It's not edgy for me to talk about it anymore because I just talk about it so much. Like, to the point where people are like, why do you talk about it so much? I think for me, because maybe it's growing up in a religious background. I don't want to blame it on that. I don't want to blame everything on that. Maybe it's growing up in the more conservative part of California and then moving to the Bible Belt. Maybe that's part of it, that I've never really felt that it's okay to talk about stuff like that. And so as soon as I was aware enough, that was all I wanted to talk about, because it's like, why not? Why the fuck not? As long as everyone participating in the conversation can consent to that conversation and is a willing participant and should be a willing participant, what's the problem? What's the harm? Now, if you're like my mom or my sister listening to this, if you could just tune out of this episode, that'd be great. Actually, it's too late. You've already heard me say a bunch of bad words. So I'm sorry to my sister, who I'm pretty sure does listen to this. I'll have to text her and tell her not to. If you are, though, love you much. I still owe you like $100 for mom and dad's anniversary present. I will get that back to you. But it's just this weird shame that I felt that really kind of struck me, because I was sitting at this desk that you can't see, but I'm sitting here typing up this chapter, really in the zone. Like, this is TMI. No, it's not TMI. It's a bodily function. I was sitting here typing this, like going through the motions and then like getting up and leaving and going and doing something else. I kept having to like sit down and come back, because it was a lot of like emotional, sort of like not physical or visual stimulation, but I think because everything in my head is words, I don't see pictures. It's like porn in my head, just like playing as I'm writing it and imagining the scenario and kind of framing these characters out in a way that makes sense. I'm going to say this quietly. I gave myself fucking blue balls writing this. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? They're a real thing. Not like you blue balls and you had to have sex with me because I have blue balls. Not like that. But it's a real phenomena. Like, I could not believe it. And it's something that's so natural, and yet I felt so much weird guilt writing. Like, I'm writing it, and there's a window here that you can't see. Yeah, that you can't see. But it looks onto my computer screen and my neighbor's like balcony, and I'm pretty sure they're a couple of queers just like me that live up there. And all I had was this document open, and then a picture that I find so beautiful, the framing of it, the coloring of it, the rawness of the picture. That's just, it's actually like an actual couple in real life, a gay couple, and they also happen to be we'll just say adult performers. But there's this picture that a photographer took of them, and it's so beautiful. It's just the two of them they're naked, but you only see kind of their side profiles, and they're just in this beautiful embrace. And it was just like an inspiration to me to look at it and kind of see this like intimacy. What I find interesting, and see, we haven't even talked about the fucking chapter. Let's wrap this up so we can talk about the chapter. I just couldn't place the shame, and then when I finally placed it, I was like, no, I'm not going to go back and like take the dick and take the cock and take the ass out of it. In fact, the next time we deal with an asshole, I'm going to talk about the fucking asshole. I'm not scared. I don't want to feel shame about that sort of thing, and no one should feel shame about it, because you can watch any R-rated comedy led by a male comedian, and they're going to talk about every single facet of a woman's body, no matter what the movie's about, at some point. It's going to be invasive. It's going to be weird and strange, like, for no reason. So if there's a reason that I'm covering this sort of subject matter, or it furthers this plot, and that's the whole point of the movie, it's not pointless to do it, why not do it thoroughly, and why not do it in a way that is honest and I don't know, not so flowery and removed and sterile and from a third person that's so far removed that it doesn't make sense. That was my revelation for the week. I also realized that I've said it before, it's hard to write a sex scene, period. I've never written one between a man and a woman, or some opposite pronouns. Never done it, probably never going to. There's enough of that in the world. But it's very hard to write it between two people who use the same pronouns, because you're either using their names every time the narrator switches referencing to one of them, or it's referencing one of them by name and then using the pronouns of the other one or the same one. I know it seems simple. It probably is simple, and I'm just an idiot, and I keep writing every week to get better, and maybe I'm getting worse. I don't know. I've gotten worse at cutting my bangs, I've gotten worse at pretending I'm, hiding that I'm going bald. So, I don't know. But, and it's a big but, and it's my but I do like this chapter. Let's talk about the actual content of the chapter just for a minute. So, mostly it's sex. Big shocker, but there's a couple things in here that we do need to at least address briefly. Number one is that Warren goes outside the gates, right? And he sort of just has these weird, he gets them a lot, where he just kind of gets this thought in the back of his head that he can't describe or place or really maintain for a long period of time. And he doesn't really know what to do with those, and he's not going to. Things that you should remember is, one, he's not supposed to have anyone that's not him on the property ever. That was one of the rules initially. Number two is he's not supposed to spend more than 2 nights away from the house at all. Like, per year, that's his cap, is 2 singular nights away. I find that interesting. I know why. You probably have already pieced together why, but we're not going to spoil it in case you don't. I'm just going to play with my bangs and talk about that. And then let's also talk about, so he lets Garrett onto the property, this insurance adjuster. First of all, thought about pulling a Stephen King and making it me, have a cameo. It's not me. It's just something that happens. Your car gets wrecked. Somebody comes out, looks at it. The same thing would happen for the house, but houses aren't required to have insurance after they're paid off. Cars are. That's just how it works. So what I find interesting is your kind of first thought would probably be, no one's allowed on the property except for Warren. So if somebody tries to come on the property, then they're going to get shocked and thrown back or instantly shot, or something crazy is going to happen. Nothing crazy happens. Garrett goes on the property. He sees where the Jeep burned down. He kind of acts a little funny. He's kind of put off by Warren after that. And we don't know why yet. It will be revealed very quickly what it is about his brief time on the property and off the property with Warren that he kind of was like, I don't love this. I'm sorry I keep looking over here. If you're listening, it doesn't matter. But if you are ever watching this someday in the future when I'm dead and gone, I keep looking over here. It's because I can see myself. And so I keep checking myself as if I change how I look at all. But another thing of note while he's down there is that he's looking at the gate, And as he's standing off the property and he's looking at the gate, it's slowly just kind of melting in front of him. Like, maybe not melting, but deteriorating rapidly in front of him. And he expresses this to Edward, who immediately is like, oh, that makes total sense. And his reasoning, I think, kind of makes sense, because I have, in fact, accidentally left water on a cast iron skillet, and it does rust very fast. It doesn't rust very quickly if it's been blued, so if it's been treated with a chemical to kind of prevent it from rusting, if it's been conditioned, or if it's been painted. That doesn't happen. But Warren is, his mind is always being pulled in at least one direction away from where it's supposed to be working, which is for himself. It's always being kind of controlled in the daytime by Lila, by Edward, maybe not by Edward, we don't know, by Edward or Thomas. It's always being controlled at least in one additional way. But he's also a little drunk, he's not sober. He's had this weird, stressful encounter. He's got all the makings of someone who maybe he's not being taken advantage of, but someone who is making a decision that they wouldn't be able to make. They wouldn't have the lack of wherewithal to make if they were, not being pulled in all these directions. So we kind of get why the night before he only let Edward in for a few moments, and then the next night he's like, let me suck that dick, and I get it. I think we've all, I think we all sing. Is a Victorious reference. It's not even a Victorious reference. It's Victoria Justice. Just search, I think we all sing Victoria Justice, and you'll see what that was. It's very funny if you get, like, I guess it's Gen Z humor, maybe millennial humor. I think it's funny. But it's very much, I think we all have seen a big swanging dick, and it's just mesmerized. We've all seen a big man, or maybe a little man. Maybe that's your thing. Or maybe men are not your thing at all. Or maybe it's non-binary people that are your thing. Whatever. We've all seen someone that we're just like, yeah, that person could make me make some decisions I wouldn't make normally. That's kind of what Edward is to Warren. Let's do some analysis that may spoil some things, or may kind of give us more context that we haven't gotten yet, but that is kind of, it's implied already. So if you're not interested in that, if you just want the story and maybe conversation, if you just want the story and the straight facts, gay facts, get the fuck out. You can leave. It's fine. I'll see you next week. We'll have a new chapter. It's going to be basically the reverse of this. It's going to be his night and then the next day. So you've kind of gotten the format. It's similar. Some days it'll cover 6 days. Some days it'll cover a night. Sometimes it'll cover a couple weeks. But I'll see you next week. So goodbye. And then to the rest of you that are still here, which is 2, let's talk about some context that we maybe haven't explicitly stated, but that kind of exists, right? So we know that Lila and Thomas previously were changing the way that they looked to appeal to what Warren found attractive. We get that. We're there. Edward showed up after Lila had gotten a glimpse at his phone and had kind of seen him go through a couple of iterations of Thomas, and he just kind of showed up and was perfect. Or if not perfect for Edward or for Warren, not his ideal man, close enough that it didn't matter. Or maybe one of the 17 versions of perfect men that he has in his head, because let's be honest, all men, not all men, a lot of men are perfect. I would say, if you're not a Republican, if you're like cool, you're perfect. Like, it doesn't matter. But he's one of the good versions that Warren finds irresistible. But the thing is that their personalities are never really changing that much. They kind of are just not generic, but more like sponges, where everything that Warren says or any information he gives to them, they just absorb and then change a little bit. Much like a sponge, as you use it and it gets dirty, it changes a little bit. But Thomas ended up, because he was shy and because he was, what we can tell now is he was not as into it as his mother was. Thomas was the prototype, right? Thomas gave Lila a lot of good information that she could pass on to Edward as he comes onto the farm. I'm not going to say that Edward was always the plan to begin with, because I can't say that, because I don't know if that's true. But in either case, that's some context that is not explicitly stated, but we can infer it from kind of, if you sit and think about the story. Not that you have to. You don't have to do that. But I think it does help to kind of put things together as to why there was already a man that could look any way that he wanted, and Warren was like, no, I'd rather kind of treat you as an employee, as a friend, as someone that I keep at a distance because I don't want to screw this up. But then Edward shows up as the bigger, meatier, more round version of what Thomas had kind of presented to him as a sponge that had no previous context, that wasn't as important to Warren because he was just an addition that showed up. And then he kind of immediately, Edward was more willing to absorb information and put it into practice to trap or to kind of convince Warren that it was okay for them to do what needed to be done. And I do think it needed to be done. That's some context that I think has been needed. I've needed to say, but I haven't wanted to like throw that out there until we really got to a point where Warren had said, yes, I want to suck on that wiener. I almost said pecker, but that doesn't feel good. I want to suck on it. And that's what he said, and that's what he did, and that's great. I love that for him. That's a big chunk that I think once you sit down and think about it, it makes sense and you put it together. But for me to just put it together for you is easier. It's easier. You're not here reading a novel, so it's not in front of you. You can't just reference the text unless you go to my YouTube videos and pull them all up. Really, honestly, there's no way for you to do it because you'd have to type it all out yourself, and I don't think you want to do that. Or maybe Siri. No, Siri wouldn't be able to do it. But that's what I think was kind of missing for me, is just explaining it, because you're not there to go back and forth and say, did he already know this, or did he tell them this, or when did she realize that he was into big hairy men? Like, you don't want to go back and review it, and I get it. Why would you want to? Podcasts are not as easy to skip backwards in as a book. Some other context that I think is necessary is important to consider when we move forward in this story. Warren is technically being taken advantage of when he's awake because his mind is being altered. But what I will say, and what makes me sleep at night okay that this is normal, is number one, it could be kind of Stockholm syndrome-y, but more importantly, I hate to say it this way, but his mind has been altered and memories have been taken out, so he's still making decisions. No one's forcing him to do anything. He's still making decisions on his own based on this reality. They're like two separate realities, you know what I mean? And so when he's in his full reality and he's got all his memories, he's like, no way, Jose, that's not for me. But is no way, Jose problematic? Won't say it again till I know. But when it comes to, like, I don't want to be like, he's being coerced. He's not being coerced. You know what I mean? He is a willing participant in the situation situation. If you consider the fact that he could just leave, he's gotten all these weird feelings. He could leave. He doesn't leave. Instead, he stays there. And for all intents and purposes, he's forming a relationship with Edward that he feels is genuine, and that during reality, because this dream world is not reality, right? During reality, what he considers to be reality and what we objectively consider to be reality, he's making an informed decision that is benefiting him. That, I think, is what is important to also, like, sleep at night. You know what I mean? And we've also set up the ground rules that me, as the author, the creator of this little world... Okay, spoiler. If they have sex during the day, first of all, it doesn't matter, because during the day, he can't technically, like, it's willing, but it's not fully informed willing. You know what I mean? It's very much in the same way where, like, you have sex with a Republican, but you didn't know they were a Republican before you hooked up with them, and then you find out they're a Republican, and you're like, I would have never hooked up with you if I'd known this thing about you. But it's kind of that sort of thing. But the rules that we've set up in this story is that it has to be willing, and it has to be... Well, we don't know it yet, but we're going to find out soon. It has to be willing, and it has to be willing when you are fully aware. So Lila, the first time around, the second time around, third time around, just assume that in the dream, this irresistible woman would be irresistible in the dream and in real life. Wouldn't be that difficult. Warren's a different story because he's queer. He's gay. So that didn't work. And then he started to form like an actual bond with these people outside of like finding them sexually attractive. And so he was like, I don't want to do it. So they had to introduce a third character that doesn't really mean anything to him beforehand. You develop relationships with people pretty quickly when you're around them for long periods of time, much like in We Just Call It Love. That's kind of what I struggled with. Was there enough time for them to fall in love? I think yes. I think you can fall in love in a day. I don't know. I'm not a hopeless romantic. It took me and my boyfriend like 9 months to say I love you. And then we did it on accident. And then we didn't say it again for like 6 more months. So, everybody's different. But that context is important going forward, that just because the deed is done, the seed is spilled, doesn't mean that like the contract is completed. Number one, we know that it is, it can oftentimes take centuries in this context for a succubus. Sorry, I had to remember which one was which. A succubus to become pregnant, to have a demon baby. We're just going to call him demon baby. And we don't know when that could happen. Second of all, I don't know how to tell you this, but when two people, and I think this is the best way to say this, when two people with penises, when two people who have had penises from birth engage in sexual intercourse, there is not a way in which a baby can be produced. Now, that's not to say that a man cannot become pregnant, because I've seen TLC and I know that some men have uteruses. Maybe we call them deuteruses. Just a thought. You get what I'm saying. There's no way that Edward in his current form, which is for all intents and purposes, biologically, do you say biologically male? Has a penis, biologically from the time of his birth, had a penis in this form. There's no way for him to become pregnant. So we don't know how that's going to play out. I do, and it's not great. But you don't. Actually, there's a couple ways it could play out. One of them's kind of gross. Actually, they're both kind of gross, but the first one's really gross. So there's no way for that to happen. So we already know that things are going to be more complicated. So it basically is just kind of giving Warren more time to figure out how to survive. The other thing that crosses my mind to mention to you all is that how do I say this delicately? There's not really a way to say it delicately. I'll be honest with you. There's really not. The best way I can phrase it is the song When a Man Loves a Woman just started playing in my head, and that's not correct. When a person with a penis puts their penis into the butthole, a baby can't be born. So a baby can't be created. So that even further complicates things, because this sounds uncomfy, but Warren's going to know where he's sticking it. You know what I mean? So it's not as if that could be, I guess it could be a possibility if there was like a fun switcheroo, but I think you would be able to tell the difference. You would know. Maybe not in the throes of ecstasy. Listen, I'm pragmatic. You get where you need to go and you get there quickly. But like, there's a lot of context that in an audio format where you can't just skip back and see the words. You're just kind of listening and then skipping and then listening and then skipping and then listening and then skipping till you think you are where you thought you needed to be to get that context. It's hard to put things together. So the additional context that hasn't been explicitly stated, but that we understand, is that Edward can't get pregnant. And if he could get pregnant, I guess because he does have to at least assume a form that biologically functions, there's no way for him to get pregnant. Does that make sense? There's not, and this is not like I hope I'm not being transphobic. There's no way, even, well, they're my characters. So if Edward had a vagina, not to say that Warren wouldn't be just as interested, but Warren as a character probably would rather well, I mean, I created him, so I can kind of just carte blanche say that this is how he would react, and this is how we drive the plot forward, not to say that there's not complicated nuances to sexuality, because there are. In this story, Warren's going to know where he's sticking it, and where he's sticking it biologically for the bodies to function and make sense is not going to lead to a uterus, right? So Edward could very well have a uterus and have a vagina, and Warren could be very much interested in Edward, but we've kind of seen, not to say that he has an oral fixation by Shakira Oral Fixation, Volume 2, he's interested in the back door. That's fine, that's great, but there's no way for biologically for that to lead to impregnation. So Edward's kind of out of the picture for that, unless he completely shifts, or shifts in a way that doesn't make sense biologically. Not like doesn't make sense, but like literally can't function, like your uterus can't lead to your anus. You know what I mean? So there's not really a way for him to get pregnant. So there has to be a way for Lila to get pregnant. How's that going to happen? That's the context we're missing and the question we're now asking. The other part of context that I really just want to reiterate. Warren is making his informed choices based on two separate realities. One in which he's being tormented or being used, in which he does not consent to activities, and one in which he is not being used, and which the only thing that's happening is he is receiving and giving pleasure, and there may be ulterior motives, but again, there is the possibility for having sex with a Republican without knowing they're a Republican, so I think we all have lapses in judgment. That's all I'm going to say for this episode. I feel like I've talked for 17 hours, and I have to make 7 different edits, and I'm going to put the extra effort in this week, and maybe most weeks from now on, to pull their voices, their quotes, the quotations of them speaking, and edit their audio so that at least there's a little bit of a difference. When I listen to the episodes of Drabble, which most of them I did that, in which each character had a different filter or modulation or some sort of change to their voice to signify that they were a different character, I like that because it's just me. It's just me reading it. If all you're there for is listening to me read it, that's great. That's fine. It's just me reading it. I'm not a voice actor. We've talked about this. I'm not a voice actor. There's not so much I can do. I can sit in this spinny chair, which I wish I could show you. It's very mid-century, very cute. I guess I could. Can you see? It's clear plastic on the back. It's cute. There's only so much I can do. So I think that's what I'm going to try and do. So I'm going to cut it off here. And also because we're in the middle of an ice storm. It's currently, I think, 8 degrees outside, and I have to turn off my heat to record, and my toes are cold. I'm sure my boyfriend's cold, even though I told him to go to sleep so he wouldn't hear me read because it makes me uncomfortable. And I'll be back next week. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for showing me support in any way possible. Last week, I'm kind of trying to start doing this thing, even though I have no reach, whatever reach I do ever have, or maybe reach that I don't know I'll have in the future that won't benefit me, but the content will still exist, therefore inequality will still exist, is highlighting different projects. Last week, I highlighted the Ochre Project. This week, I wanted to highlight for the Gwirls. Now that I say it on video, you can see that my mouth looks funny when I say it, but it's a really good cause. I'm not going to explain it. I will let them explain it to you themselves. I'll link everything to them because Black Lives Matter, Black trans lives matter, and they're in the most danger, I think. I think I have that right. In either case, their lives matter, and we need to do research, and we need to fund reform and reformation. Those are the same thing, and education and what's the word I'm looking for? Not retribution. What's the word I'm looking for? The thing that white people are always like, no, we can't do that. We can't do that because we're white and here are big pink asses. What's the word? What's the word? Not retribution, not repayment, but reparations. We need to find ways to provide reparations and to provide equality because, and someone said this on TikTok last week and it's really stuck with me. No matter what a white or white passing, me included, I'm a white passing person, hello. And I know my hair doesn't look like this naturally, but I do a lot of self-hating work to look the way that I do. That's sad. Oh, that's sad. Any white or white passing person, inherently, there's nothing that we can do that's enough to combat the system of inequality in which we participate in. That is not your fault for being a white person, that you were born into a system that benefits you. But when you're aware of the situation, or when you choose to not be aware of it, when you choose to be ignorant, because the internet exists, I understand that there's issues with inequality or disproportionate access to education, internet. I will say that I know that that is a very small portion of people who literally cannot access the internet or access any sort of educational material. And to those people, I am very sorry and I hate that for you. But I also think they do not impact my life or the lives of the people in our nation as a whole, because if you cannot access the internet, you cannot access a book. Libraries are free, I think. Yeah, they are. Then you also don't vote. And this could be very problematic, and I'd love for somebody to correct me. But if you don't impact any life that way because you don't vote, because you can't get access to things like internet or books, which means you can't access a polling place, then you don't affect my life, in which case I hope that you educate yourself, but more power to you to be wherever you are. However, if you do vote, if you are someone who is able to get yourself to a polling place, but you are not able to get yourself to a free public library and educate yourself on the internet, in a book, I understand that some people cannot read. I get that. But there are resources available for those things, and word of mouth is something that is also free. If you can vote, if you can get yourself to vote, you can get yourself to sources of education in any format that is necessary. Therefore, there is no excuse for being ignorant. So I don't feel bad for those people. I do feel bad for people who can't even get somewhere to vote. Like, ooh, imagine that. Ooh. Where was I going with this? I need to stop taking medicine. Anyway, for the girls, I'll link everything to them. Support Black lives, support Black trans lives. Very important. Let's do that. I forgot that, like, even having no audience, not no audience, but a very small audience, no real significant outreach as far as like my regular personal Twitter, Instagram, stuff like that, it still matters, right? At first I didn't understand why it mattered that everyone spoke up, because it's like, or like a celebrity, because I don't care what celebrities think. Like, they're not there to think for me. I'm here to think for myself. But then I realized it's a sign of solidarity, and it was my privilege that was kind of just like, didn't think about that because it never had to think about that, right? I think about it for other things, but I've grown calloused and stopped caring about those things in my cause. That doesn't mean I stopped caring about other people's causes, or, right to live. And then I started realizing that it's the same for me. Just because I don't use social media, I still have access to social media. I still have a following of 100 people on my Facebook or whatever, and I should use that power. So I'm going to do that for this podcast, even if there's 5 or 6 of us here. Maybe someday someone will stumble upon it and educate themselves and learn something and become a different person that is more educated and accepting and loving. Even if it's just one person, I've done my job, baby. But I keep not ending the podcast. So I guess don't come back next week. If you could leave me a 5-star review. If it's anything less than a 5-star, I don't want it. But if you could leave me a 5-star review, that would be great. On whatever podcast medium you use, preferably Apple Podcasts, just because that's what I can see easily. But you can leave it anywhere. If you could go to my YouTube channel and, watch a video or two, just put them on in the background. I don't really care. Tell me if you like this lighting. It's chapter 15. Tell me if you like the lighting. I really like it. I like that some of the lights are red, some of the lights are blue. I've still got my ring light so that I look like a human person. But in either case, I'll be back next week. Bye. You can't see it on the video, but I'm going, I'm sticking my tongue out. Bye.